what did we do? Ma'azoyis and Sisa, what did we do that we sent the Jewish people out? Hello. You had 10 plagues. The last plague was the plague of the firstborn. You begged Moses to leave. And now you don't know why you let them leave? Why don't you know? And why are you foolish enough to think after 10 plagues you can chase the Jewish people? Now, it is true that by coming back to the Red Sea, the place that we happened to have parked was right in front of the last idol of Egypt. Happened to be called Baal Tzifon. So I said, you see, our idol is stronger. He's confusing the Jewish people. We can go fight. But come on. Why would anybody in their right mind think that they could chase after the Jewish people? So, interesting, we did borrow all that money. And we did say we were borrowing it. Now the Egyptians are angry. I want my money back. And as soon as a person gets angry, he does not think properly anymore. His whole thought process is out the window. He's angry. Angry people don't have the ability to think. So they're angry, they don't have their money. So any reason that they should have to not chase us, that gets pushed to the side. Instead, they're ready full force to come and attack, even though it's going to lead to the destruction. But it's like they totally forgot everything that God did. And Pharaoh encouraged them, and I'll lead the army, and we'll share in the spoils, unlike a regular king who takes all the spoils. I'll share everything with you. So again, it's revolves around money, and it seems to revolve around the fact that they got angry. Like we talked about back by the plague of the frogs. You get angry, you'll lose. So, one of the famous questions is, their chariots are driven by horses. So the question is, where the horses come from? Where exactly did the Egyptians get horses? So if we backtrack back to the plague of hail, so Moses warned the Egyptians and said that if you want your animals to live, you got to bring them into the houses. And we talked about it and what it was like to bring your animals into the house and part of the suffering. We talked about it. But the verse, interesting enough, says, who were the ones that brought their horses into their houses, or their animals, for that matter? Those that feared God. And if you don't fear God, it's not happening. You are not bringing your animals in. You're gonna, okay, we have different phrases to say. We're not going to use any of them. You don't fear God, you're going to leave your animal, let it die. Let God kill my animal. If you fear God a little bit, you'll bring your animal into the house. So the only animals that were actually alive were the ones that were owned by those that fear God. But as soon as Pharaoh says, I need horses, we need chariots, we got to run all our chariots, and we got to chase the Jewish people, we got to destroy them. Those guys line up. First, Pharaoh, here's my horse. Hitch it up to your chariot. Go get those Jews. It's like amazing. But again, perhaps that all goes into the anger. They're not thinking properly. I'm sure God's helping, but they're not thinking. But the commentaries do mention the fact that even the best Egyptian is willing to give his animal so the Egyptians can chase after the Jewish people, means even the best Egyptian is a rotten fellow. And they'll pay for it. They're all going to drown. So then, so their army is chasing, and the Jewish people are by the Red Sea. And it says they look up and see the Egyptian army coming. So I tried to explain this to my class, but they're by the sea. It's a flat area. How exactly do they see the Egyptian army coming? What do they see? So one of the answers is that the Egyptians are chasing them throughout this desert. There's got to be a humongous dust cloud. So all the Jewish people see is this cloud which is just going up to the sky. And they say, if that's the size of the cloud, imagine the size of the army that's underneath that cloud. And there's different reactions. Some people want to wave the white flag. Some people want to stand and fight. Some people want to pray. And of course, there's always those that want to go ahead and complain to Moses. So Moses says, this is not the time to complain. It's also not the time to fight. It's not even interesting enough the time to pray, and certainly not to give up. This is God's battle. God took us out here. God brought us to this place to lure the Egyptians here. You just stand still, sit back, and watch the show. But the music is playing, and I hope you enjoyed it. Short and sweet. Thank you, of course, to all my wonderful sponsors listeners. I can't do it without you. Thank you on the production team. We have Alan in the back. I hope I've left you some food for thought. Until next time, I am Rabbi Tzvi Jacobson. You've been listening to Let's Talk Torah on NRM Streamcast. Until next time, don't forget to think about it.
A million dreams for the world we're gonna make. There's a house we can build. Every room inside is filled with things from far away.
You may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it's a tradition. And because of our traditions, every one of us knows who he is and what God expects him to do.
Day and night must scramble for a living.
It's Tzvi Jacobson with NRM Streamcast, and we'll spend our time talking Torah, learning stuff, and having fun while we learn. You can always send your questions and comments to our mailbag at letstalktorah@gmail.com, and of course I will answer as many as I can. Or you can check out our amazing webpage at letstalktorah.net. That's letstalktorah.net. The archives are there. The new shows are there. Questions, comments, you want to be on the show. People have joined us that way. And, of course, the all-important donate button. As so many of you are so kind, you hit that donate button. Give a donation to the show. Help us grow. Help us cover our costs so we can continue to give you these amazing shows, talk about the Torah portion and other things. But we do need your help, and we do thank you in advance. And we are in top 10 in feed spots, 10 best Jewish book podcasts. And we are still at number 5. So we talked in the last show a little bit. I took my family up north. You know, just a few pointers. It's like, I hang out with my kids. Sometimes we eat supper together. I study with my children. I help them with their schoolwork. But there's nothing like going away on a family trip. Now, we didn't do a lot of stuff. We went away for a weekend, Thursday through Sunday. We're cooped up in a house, and it's beautiful. So we went tubing on Thursday. We're in the car, go tubing, take some hikes. We go snowmobiling on Friday, and the kids love it. Now, snowmobiling, everyone's on their own, right? We'll talk while we're waiting. There's 2 snowmobiles. We'll take turns. We're talking, but that's like a focus, like a thing to do. Tubing also is, you are talking, but you're not really together. You're like taking turns or sometimes in a group. It's just fun stuff. But once we're back, right, so we're going to eat supper. We're going to make hot dogs. We're going to sit around the table. We're going to share the food. We're going to talk to each other. We're going to play board games. We like Catan, by the way. And my kids taught me a card game, which I'm not good at. We'll play this code names. We actually brought up like 10 games, which at the end, they only wanted to play like 3 of them, but that was fine. It's just family time where it's not school. There's no pressure. Enjoy each other's company. People brought stuff to read. You sit on the couch. We eat the meals together. Everybody sleeps as long as they want. The kids brought up a puzzle. Last year we brought up a 1,000-piece puzzle, but there were more children involved. This year was a 500-piece puzzle, but they got it done. I must say, pretty impressive. It's family time. And, of course, there's lots of food. And, as we all say, you can always diet next week. But a lot of food. Not as much as usual, because we learned our lesson. But you make popcorn, and you make grilled cheese, and you make sandwich maker, and you can make pizza, and we had different salads we made, and it was just beautiful. It was really, really an amazing trip. Really amazing. But not as amazing as the trip the Jewish people are about to go through. Because in this week's Torah portion, Parashat B'Shalach, we're going through the Red Sea. And the Egyptian army is right behind us. So the first thing God does, is we talked about this in the last show, there's this pillar of cloud. And that's really supposed to lead us. We're supposed to follow the cloud. Wherever the cloud goes, that's the Pied Piper, we follow. But now the cloud moves behind the Jewish people. And now the Jewish people have an open path to the Red Sea. And the cloud separates between the Jewish people and the Egyptians. So the Egyptians can't come near us. And the fire, the pillar of fire, is also here, even though normally it's either the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire. But in this case, they're both here. And the fire will also go behind the Jewish people, so we have light. But the cloud does not let any of the light go through to the Egyptians. They will now have their final day of darkness, because they only had 6 days of darkness. Now they're going to have one more. And the cloud will protect us. The Egyptians can't get through. Their spears, their swords, their arrows, their missiles, whatever they have, not getting through. And now, even though we said in the last show that God tells the Jewish people, you're going to watch and God's going to do all the fighting, that's not 100% true. It's true, but maybe not 100%. We still need to do something. Nothing as far as fighting. We're not fighting at all with this world power Egyptian army with 600 elite chariots. Now it sounds like not such a big deal, except in those days chariots were tanks. And until you get to the time of Alexander the Great, no one knew how to deal with an army of chariots. I don't know how you won a war, lost a war, but chariots were the tanks, and they had no way of stopping them. Which, by the way, is interesting, because in all warfare, right, I build a bigger, stronger tank. You have to build a way to stop the tank. So now I have to build more things to protect my tanks, and I have to build more missiles and drones that will destroy your tanks. That's modern-day warfare. But in those days, till Alexander the Great came up with the flanks that could stop the chariots, they had no way to stop chariots. So, but what do we have to do? We need to walk into the Red Sea, and it didn't split yet. Moses waved his staff over it, and there's an easterly wind blowing. I think it's easterly wind. There's a wind blowing over it all night, but Moses says, you got to march in, and it will split. So my son asked me, I still want to check it up, but I think this is a good answer. Moses is not the one that leads the way. It's actually his, it's Aaron's brother-in-law, but Nachshon ben Aminadav, the prince of the tribe of Judah, he jumps in first. And the water gets up to his nose, and then the sea splits, and then it's either debatable. Everybody had to do that, or now it's split for everybody. The tribe of Benjamin was the first tribe in, but the Jewish people have to walk into the water first, up to their nose. And then the water will split. And I told my son, I said, I don't know if there would be a benefit. Of course Moses will go in first. It doesn't show God that the Jewish people are ready to listen to him. This was something the Jewish people needed to do. They needed to march in to the Yam Suf, into the Red Sea, let the Red Sea split when they walk in. And that will be a proof. But Moses walking in, that's no proof. Of course Moses does whatever God says. But we, the Jewish people, needed to do it so we could show that we have no problem listening to God. We will listen to God, and therefore the sea will split. and 12 tunnels are created, one per tribe. And even though normally, if you've ever gone to a beach or the ocean or the Great Lakes, once you get far enough out, I mean, these things are hundreds of feet deep, if not more. But God didn't want us to trouble ourselves to have to walk all the way down to the bottom and then come all the way up. It's not happening. Once we get far enough in where the water is pretty deep and now we have tunnels, now the waters harden. They congeal almost. And we're walking on like marble. Beautiful marble. There's trees. You want to drink. You touch the water. You get a drink. You can see through. You can see people from other tribes. Very pleasant. And now we're marching through, but we're not going all the way deep. Unlike the Egyptians, when the Egyptians will enter the sea into these tunnels, they're going all the way down deep, and they're going to be in the mud. And that mud is going to be so hot, the fire and cloud are still separating us, and it's burning up the mud. But when their chariots hit that mud and that fire, the wheels will just totally disintegrate. They'll burn off, and now the Egyptians are going to be dragged around by their horses in chariots without wheels. So, of course, normally if you're getting bounced around, you're going flying. But part of the miracle / punishment is that the Egyptians are stuck in their chariots. They're bouncing back and forth in the chariot. So it always reminds me, when I was a kid, there was this cartoon called Roadrunner. So if you're my age, you know Roadrunner. If you're not, you've never seen it, because it wasn't much of a talking cartoon. You had this Roadrunner, and the coyote, his name was Wile E. Coyote. And, right, Wiley, right, it's a play on words. Anyways, he would always go to this place called Acme. I guess Acme was like a general, like a Walmart or a Target or a Costco or something. You could buy anything in Acme. And he always bought all these plans, and every plan he bought never worked. But what happened in almost every single cartoon is the coyote is chasing after the Roadrunner. The Roadrunner steps off the cliff, and the coyote follows him right off the cliff. Except the Roadrunner then steps back onto the cliff, and the coyote falls a mile down, and, till the next comic strip. Which is how I always imagine the Egyptians over here. There's a miracle. The Jewish people just walked into the Red Sea. Huge tunnels of dry land that the Jewish people are walking into the sea and not drowning. Why do the Egyptians think that they could follow suit? As I don't know what this miracle is. And if you're Egyptian, I don't know what this magic trick is. But what makes me think, if I'm an Egyptian, that I can survive walking through this tunnel? What am I thinking? Now, perhaps the answer to this question is something we discussed at length in the last show. And that is, who says they were thinking? The Egyptians are coming to destroy the Jewish people. They are angry. Their slaves have left them. They want their money back. They are angry. And if you're angry, your brain doesn't work. Well, if your brain doesn't work, you will not think, is this a good idea, running into the split Red Sea when it doesn't make any sense at all? But they did, and they will drown. So the Jewish people are walking through in comfort. Meanwhile, the Egyptians are just bouncing all over the place, and there's noise, and there's fire, and there's mud, and they're all discombobulated, which is a great word, by the way. And once the Jewish people get out of the Red Sea, now, by the way, it wasn't a shortcut. We didn't go across the Red Sea. We made like a semicircle, like a rainbow, to go in, to draw the Egyptians in behind us, and then we go out, and once all the Jewish people are out, Moses will raise his stick, and the waters will come crashing down. Actually, it says first they came down like bricks, right? It's a punishment. They made us make bricks. And then it's the water, and then they're drowning, and they're being tossed around. It's like a mixing bowl, it says. And there were actually different levels of how they died. The best of the Egyptians sunk like lead. They didn't have to suffer so much. The middle ones sunk like stone, and the wicked ones sunk like straw. And anybody you ever go play with your kids by the water, you throw in these little sticks or straw, those don't really sink. Afterwards, God told the Red Sea, you have to spit out all the Egyptians. Their bodies have to be on the seashore. So the Red Sea, or the angel of the Red Sea says, come on, it's not fair. You gave me all this fish food, and you're taking it away. So God says, don't worry, I'll pay you back. When Deborah the prophetess, when she goes to war with Sisera then has the largest army. His elite tanks were 900 steel elite tanks, unlike the Egyptians that only had 600 of the elite ones. They probably had thousands of little ones. So his army will fight Deborah, and the chariots will get heated up, and they'll bring it into the river to the Jordan to get cooled off, and then the water will sweep them away, and eventually they'll be swept into the Red Sea. So, but we need to see the dead Egyptians, because as long as we don't see the dead Egyptians, it's a slave mentality problem. What is that slave mentality problem? Even pre the Civil War, when we had the Underground Railroad and you had the slaves escaping, they were always petrified that their master would bring them back. What are you afraid of? Fight. Slave mentality does not allow a slave to fight his master. It's just ingrained. There's nothing he or she can do. And we had that same problem. We needed to see that all our masters were dead, and then we didn't have to feel that they could chase after us, and we would be free. And then we sang what's called Shiras Hayom. We sang Az Yashir. We sang praise to God, and that's the rule, that it is expected that when God does a miracle, that the Jewish people have to sing praise. We call it a song. I'm not saying it has to have a tune, but it's poetry, and it's usually with a prophecy, and there's one here, and there's another one we've talked about that they sang when they sang about the well, about Miriam's well. Deborah, the prophetess I just spoke about, she sings a praise as well when they defeat Sisera's army. There's actually 10 songs throughout the Torah and Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Anyways, interesting enough, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, when Sancheir's army was destroyed, did not sing Shira. He said, I'll just go study Torah. That will be my praise. But it's a complaint against him. It was expected that he should have sung a praise, and he did not. Anyways, we didn't want to leave. We want to stay there. Moses to force us to leave. Why didn't we want to leave? Because there was so much gold and silver. There was so much gold and silver because when they went to war, the Egyptians, they decorated their horses and chariots with all kinds of jewelry. So we're busy collecting for a couple days. More gold and silver there than we took out of Egypt. That's one reason. But there's a second reason, which is even more fascinating. And that is, it says that a maidservant had a greater recognition, understanding, revelation of God than even the greatest prophets. We saw God here. We saw God fighting for us. Why? This is a holy place. Why would we want to leave? Which is interesting, but not a Jewish thought. In other words, in Jewish thought, it's understood a place is not holy because a miracle was done there. That's not what makes a place holy. What makes a place holy is because God's presence is there. Once God's presence leaves, it's not holy anymore. So God's presence has left the Yam Suf. No reason to stay. God came to us by Mount Sinai. While God is there, it's holy. You can't step on the mountain. Nowadays, you want to go to Mount Sinai? Go right ahead. There's nothing special about Mount Sinai because God's presence is not there. Where is God's presence? In a synagogue, in a study hall, and on the Temple Mount. That is why, for the most part, the Jewish people do not go on the Temple Mount. There are some people that go. They say they know where they're allowed to walk, and they say they know how to purify themselves. But overall, people do not go on the Temple Mount because God's presence is there. But that's what makes it holy. That's why the Western Wall is such a big deal, because God's presence is right behind it. Can you feel it? I don't know. Maybe you could, maybe you can't. You'll just have to check it out. So we travel away on our way towards Mount Sinai. My time is running out. I did want to just mention, so we run out of food. After a month of traveling, the matzah that we left Egypt with, which miraculously took care of us for a month, even though we only brought enough for breakfast, runs out. So the Jewish people complain. So God tells Moses, I'm going to send them manna from heaven. Every day they're going to get this special spiritual food, but it comes along with a cost. You see, first of all, it's spiritual food, so it's different. You have to sort of get used to it, but it tests you. Now, the first part of the test was that you couldn't leave over any food. In other words, you're going to get a daily portion, and it was actually the same portion for every person in the family, whatever, about 3.5 dozen eggs, which right now would be quite expensive because of egg prices, even though it's so interesting. My children tell me on the East Coast they're paying $10 a dozen. My daughter-in-law in Florida tells me she's paying $12 a dozen. There are places here in Michigan, Detroit, you can get $4 a dozen. It's still expensive, don't get me wrong, but it's not like these other places. But in any case, one of the rules is you have to eat all of it. Nothing can be left in your cabinet. When the day is over, when you go to sleep, you're not allowed to leave anything over. You leave something over, the next morning it's going to spoil, it's going to smell. The whole neighborhood will know that you didn't finish your manna. So this is an amazing test because, our children do it all the time, but we do it, we just don't complain, right? What happens? You go home, you open the fridge, you close the fridge, you open the cabinet, you close the cabinet. You don't want to say it, but there's like nothing to eat. You don't mean there's nothing to eat. You mean there's nothing here that you're interested in having right now. But there's tons of stuff to eat. Right in my house, there's cereal, and there's macaroni, and there's chicken, and there's eggs, and there's probably yogurt, and there's leftovers, and there's always food. There's always food. There's also, junk as well. Maybe there's potato chips, which I don't want to have, or there's always food. But maybe you don't like the choices. You're a little bored of the choices. But there's always food. Here, the cabinets must be empty, because that way when you go to sleep at night, you know the only way you're going to have food tomorrow morning is if God provides you with food. So part of the idea of the manna was that we have to be totally reliant. We're always totally reliant on God. The problem is we don't realize we're totally reliant on God. But the Jewish people in the desert had to live that when I go to sleep, there is nothing in the cabinet. If God does not give me manna tomorrow morning, I will starve, and my children. So it's a certain level of trust in God that was demanded of the Jewish people. Right? If you think about it, for the most part, I don't know if you know anybody that doesn't have any food in the cabinet. Now, I remember we had a good friend. My wife was in her house many, many, many years ago, and she wanted to give something to one of the kids, and she couldn't find any food. Now she couldn't find something the child would like. It was like half a jar of peanut butter. There was really, the cupboards were bare. When somebody talks to the cupboards being bare, the cupboards were bare. So my wife went with some friends, and they bought 20 bags of groceries, and then they introduced them to food stamps, because this was obviously a very poor family, and they needed to be taken care of, and they deserve to be taken care of, and there's safety nets out there. But actually their cupboards were bare. But you don't run into people like that too often who say it's a choice of food or medicine. There's food. Maybe not the most, delicious. We're not talking steak. Okay, so have a peanut butter sandwich. There's food. Also, part of the command was you're supposed to collect every day enough for your family. Now, collecting enough, as I told you, about 3.5 dozen eggs worth. Right? We're at 43 1/5 eggs, so okay, you do the math. You could gather more, but by the time you got home, it disappeared. You could gather less, and by the time you got home, you had enough, but I don't think you were supposed to play the game. I think you were actually supposed to try to bring in the right amount. And, but on Shabbos, interesting enough, Friday the mun fell double, because you can't go collect the mun on Shabbos. Not because, maybe because, but that's not the reason. The reason that it fell double is the holiness of Shabbos says it can't fall on Shabbos. You got to prepare beforehand. But our time is up. The music is playing, and I hope you'd enjoyed it, short and sweet. Thank you, of course, to all of my wonderful sponsors listening. I can't do it without you. Thank you to the production team. We have Al in the back. I hope I've left you some food for thought. Until next time, I'm Rabbi Tzvi Jacobson. You've been listening to Let's Talk Torah on NRM Streamcast. Until next time, don't forget to think about it.
There's a house we can build. Every room inside is filled with things from far away. Special things I compile, each one there